She showed up at my door with a suitcase and tears in her eyes. My sister, once so proud, was now jobless, sick, and abandoned by the man who'd promised her the world. I didn't hesitate. I opened my home, my fridge, and my heart. She cried, in silence, her first night on my couch, and I told her, "You're safe here." I thought I was doing the right thing. And maybe I was. But kindness has a price when you're dealing with someone who's already planned the betrayal. I never imagined betrayal could wear my sister's face. She blended into our lives like she'd always belonged. She'd help with the groceries, laugh at my husband's terrible jokes, and even pick the kids up from school. I thought we were healing her together, but in hindsight, every smile felt rehearsed. She planned it all. Every thank you, every favor. It was just camouflage for what she was really doing behind my back. The signs were there. I just didn't want to believe them. He started dressing better. She'd always be around when I wasn't. Sometimes I'd catch them whispering, pausing when I entered the room. And still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I was nothing to him anymore. And somewhere deep down, I think I knew that. But I clung to hope, like a woman drowning in denial. I didn't know I was hosting the beginning of my own heartbreak. Then, it happened. One morning, she waited until the kids were at school, walked into the kitchen, and calmly said she was pregnant. Not only that, the baby was my husband's. I stood there, frozen. No screaming, no crying, just silence. My silence was my answer. She looked me in the eye and told me I needed to leave my own house so they could raise their child in peace. The audacity left me breathless. She thought I would stay quiet. She thought I would give up, that I'd curl into a corner and cry until the pain passed. But she didn't realize. I'd already hit rock bottom years ago. What they didn't know is I rebuilt myself once before, and this time, I wasn't going to collapse. I found the messages the same night, hidden under a fake email address. Her words to him were desperate, manipulative, and smug. She exposed him in the worst way possible, through arrogance. He broke me first, long before she ever stepped into our lives. But I held on, thinking I was preserving something sacred. Turns out, I was just preserving his comfort. I was deceived. I wasn't a wife to him. I was a placeholder. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't new. She wasn't the first, just the boldest. And that realization, it shattered any remaining softness I had for either of them. Revenge wasn't even my first thought. Survival was. I needed to protect myself, my peace, my kids. So I smiled through dinner, packed my own bags, not to leave, but to prepare. She assumed the house was his. She assumed everything was his. But the truth came out when she was captured by her own arrogance. She never checked the name on the deed. She had no idea what I'd planned. That night, I slept beside a stranger. I watched him snore, unaware that his perfect little scheme was crumbling. He never saw it coming. He thought I would stay forever, that I'd be too afraid to lose him. But I was already lost. Now I was simply choosing to find myself again. And oh, did I. Nobody believed her when she called my parents to explain. She cried to them, saying I kicked out a pregnant woman. But I hadn't kicked her out yet. I was waiting for the perfect moment. And trust me, I was planning it to the last detail. She assumed betrayal made her powerful. But betrayal doesn't win when the betrayed woman finally stands up. And the moment I stood up, everything changed. I looked at her and said, "You have until tomorrow." No yelling, no tears, just facts. That stunned look on her face, priceless. And it was only the beginning, because the next morning she pulled a move even I didn't expect, and not even he was prepared for what came next. I still remember her face when she stood in the middle of my living room and dropped the bomb. No shame, no hesitation, just cold certainty. "I'm pregnant," she said, like she was giving me good news. "And we're keeping it. You'll need to move out soon, I swear." For a moment, the air left my lungs. My world didn't just shake, it cracked. I wasn't even angry at first. I was numb. Betrayal like that, it doesn't scream. It stares. It freezes. It paralyzes. She cried. In silence once, years ago, when her heart had been broken. I held her through it. And now she stood here, calm and smug, as if my pain meant nothing. My silence was my answer. I didn't react the way she expected. I didn't scream. I just looked at her. And then, like some twisted encore, he walked. And my husband, the man I built a life with, he looked more confused than guilty, like he wasn't even part of the script she was reading from. She thought I would stay silent, that I'd pack my bags and disappear while they played house in the home I created, but oh, she planned it all wrong. Because when she turned to him for backup, expecting him to nod and smile, he blinked like a deer in headlights. "You told her?" he asked. His voice cracked. He wasn't ready for that moment. He never saw it coming. That's when I knew he wasn't in control either. She had blindsided him too. She thought she had leverage, that because she was pregnant, she held all the power, but she forgot one tiny, crucial fact. The house, the bank accounts, the cars, all in my name. He looked at her like she was a stranger, and I saw it then. He was just as scared as he was stupid. She exposed him without realizing she was exposing herself too. It wasn't love, it was desperation. And suddenly, the betrayal had cracks of comedy in it. I found the messages. Weeks ago, I just hadn't said anything. Not until now. I read how he told her he was trapped, how he blamed me for everything. His failures, his boredom, his lack of drive. He broke me first, in tiny, invisible ways. But this was his masterpiece. And now, standing there watching him squirm, I felt a strange peace wash over me. Not because I forgave him, but because I finally saw how small they were. Both of them. She exposed him thinking she'd win. She thought this moment would be her triumph. But the truth came out in layers, like peeling paint on a rotten wall. He wasn't ready to be a father. He wasn't even ready to take responsibility. "You told her without telling me first?" he snapped at her. And for the first time, she looked unsure. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one betrayed. He betrayed me, but she betrayed him too, in her own twisted way. It hit her then. He wasn't going to defend her. He wasn't going to protect her from what came next. She stood there, trying to gather her thoughts, while I stood up calmly and walked to the kitchen. "You want me to leave my own house?" I asked over my shoulder. Cute. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Nobody believed her authority anymore, especially not him. Her illusion of control shattered in real time. You see, betrayal doesn't always explode. It implodes. It folds in on itself, crushing everyone under the weight of lies, and I let it. I didn't rush to save face or fix the chaos. I let them stew in it. She cried in silence that night, just like before, but this time no one was holding her, and as much as it hurt, I didn't pity her. Because I finally understood. She was never broken. She was calculated. She had waited for this moment, and still, she lost. What none of them realized was that I had already been preparing. My plan wasn't revenge, it was revelation. I wanted them to see themselves without my loyalty protecting them. I wanted the mask to drop. And oh, it did. He looked at her like a stranger. She looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize anymore. And I was. I had changed. Quietly, steadily. They both thought I'd break, but I didn't. I evolved. And that's when I knew the next step wasn't about emotion. It was about power. So I asked them to leave, just like that. Calmly, clearly. And you should have seen their faces. But that part, that deserves its own moment. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just stood tall and told them to pack their things. Now, the house they thought they could claim, I paid for it, furnished it, maintained it. They laughed behind my back thinking I was too soft, too emotional, too meek to do anything. But not that day. That day, I was done being the quiet one. She cried in silence when I pointed to the door, but I didn't flinch. She was no longer my sister, just another woman who betrayed me. He kept staring at the floor. That's all he could do, because even he knew, he never saw it coming. I was nothing to him for so long, a placeholder, a safety net. And yet here I was, flipping the script in real time. I didn't yell or curse. That would have given them power. Instead, I smiled, cold and calm. "Out," I said. "Both of you." And that's when the panic set in. She thought I would stay quiet. He thought I would stay broken. They both miscalculated. I watched her grab her bag and shake, trying to hold back tears. But the act didn't work on me anymore. My silence was my answer. He asked if we could talk, as if we hadn't already said enough through our actions. "Talk to her," I replied. "She's your future now." The look on his face? Priceless. No anger, just regret, pure and slow burning. He begged her to come back with him once this was over. But you know what? She didn't answer. That part of the story was unraveling too. There was something strangely satisfying about seeing her sit on the front porch, crying with her phone in her hand. She probably thought someone would come save her, that maybe I'd have a change of heart. But this time, I didn't feel sorry. She planned it all, didn't she? Every text, every lie, every step. And now she was sitting in the ruins of her own ambition. Betrayal has a way of turning on itself. I just had to open the door and let it happen. He lingered longer than she did, moving slowly, packing quietly, still thinking there was a chance I'd soften. But not this woman, not anymore. I had built too much, lost too much, and now I had everything to gain by letting go. As he walked out, he looked back once, like he wanted to say something, maybe even apologize. But I didn't give him the space, because he broke me first. And when someone breaks you like that, words don't mean a damn thing. I stood in the hallway after they left, feeling the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Not empty, free. I could breathe again. The weight of pretending, forgiving, tolerating. It was finally gone. And it wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. My peace, my space, my power. This was the home they tried to steal. And now they were nothing more than shadows at the door. I didn't slam it. I simply locked it. And that was enough. They underestimated the woman I'd become, because when you've been deceived so deeply, you either drown in it or you learn to swim harder. She exposed him, and in the process, exposed herself. He betrayed me, yes, but she betrayed blood. That kind of wound doesn't heal with time. It heals with distance. I wasn't running from pain anymore. I was walking right through it, head high, eyes open, stronger with every step. And the truth came out even clearer in that quiet house. Not just about them, about me. I realized I had settled for so little, accepted so much less than I deserved. He thought I would stay, because I always had. But people confuse loyalty with weakness. And when a woman finally leaves, she finally leaves. No second thoughts, no going back. I left the version of me that tolerated betrayal at that doorstep, too. Later that night, I made myself tea, curled up on the couch, and smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was clean, free of their chaos, free of lies. The peace after the storm is unlike anything else. It's not loud, it's sacred. And as I stared out the window, I whispered, they'll regret this, not out of spite, but from certainty. You don't betray a woman like me and expect peace. You expect consequences, and trust me, those were just beginning. Because while they left with bags in hand, I had something far more powerful. Proof, documents, receipts. The next phase of my plan was already unfolding, and they had no idea what was coming. The morning after I kicked them out, I expected silence, maybe peace. But instead, my phone rang like an alarm I hadn't set. My mother. Her voice wasn't warm or curious. It was sharp, cold, almost rehearsed. "How could you?" she said, skipping any greeting. I thought she was calling to ask how I was doing. But no, she called to defend Julie. I froze. My own mother was more concerned about my sister, the woman who stole my husband, than the daughter whose heart had just been crushed. "She's pregnant, Michaela. You threw a pregnant woman onto the street." Those were her exact words. No mention of betrayal. No recognition of the pain I felt. Not even a question about my side of the story. It was like I had become invisible overnight. I stood in my kitchen, phone in hand, shaking with disbelief. I wasn't angry yet, just numb. I was nothing to him. And now, apparently, I was nothing to them either. She cried in silence. No, I cried in silence. They demanded that I fix things. Be the bigger person. Forgive her. She's family. Those words, she's family, cut deeper than any blade. What about my family? What about the home I built? What about the marriage I believed in? When did she become the victim in all this? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I kept quiet, listening as they painted Julie as this fragile soul who had made a mistake. But she planned it all. She knew exactly what she was doing when she seduced my husband. When I told them I found the messages, they didn't even flinch. No sympathy, no outrage, just excuses. Maybe she was lonely, maybe he misled her. It felt like I was trapped in some twisted story where I was cast as the villain in my own tragedy. I was deceived, and yet, somehow, I was the one being asked to apologize. I wanted to scream, but instead, my silence was my answer. That day, I realized I'd been emotionally orphaned. It wasn't just betrayal from my husband or my sister. It was my parents now choosing a version of the story where I was the problem. Nobody believed her. No, nobody believed me. And that was the deepest betrayal of all. My voice didn't matter. My hurt didn't count. They just wanted to sweep it all under the rug, tie it with a bow, and move on like nothing happened. I told them I needed space, and they called. Me dramatic. They said he begged her to come back, as if that proved he cared. But he broke me first. And Julie, she wasn't innocent. She exposed him, yes, but only because she thought it would give her power. She thought she could take my place. And worse, my parents were ready to hand it to her. I couldn't believe this was my reality. It felt like I'd been exiled from my own bloodline. I remember sitting on the floor, back against the wall, tears silently running down my face. Not for him, not even for her, but for me. For every time I showed up for people who never showed up for me. I gave so much of myself to keep that family together. And now, they were asking me to sacrifice even more for the one who betrayed me. I kept repeating to myself, he thought I would stay, but I wasn't that woman anymore. That call taught me something brutal but necessary. Some people don't want the truth. They want comfort. They didn't want to deal with the discomfort of Julie's betrayal, so they asked me to swallow the pain for everyone. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The weight was too much, and I had finally reached the point where even love wasn't enough to carry it. If protecting my peace made me the villain, so be it. So I ended the call with a whisper. Don't call me again unless it's to apologize. And then I blocked them. That single action felt like both a heartbreak and a rebirth. For the first time in years, I felt the flicker of power return. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was there. And I knew, from that moment on, I'd never let anyone silence my pain again. But just when I thought it couldn't hurt more, their next move would prove me wrong. They didn't stop. The messages kept coming, first from my mother, then my father. Long paragraphs, full of rationalizations and subtle jabs. They said Julie had been confused, that she didn't know what she was doing, that maybe, just maybe, my husband had taken advantage of her fragile emotional state. I stared at the screen, stunned. She planned it all, and yet they were still bending over backward to protect her. It was like the truth didn't matter anymore, only the version that made them comfortable. They tried to paint him as the mastermind, the manipulator, the one who had seduced poor, naive Julie, as if she hadn't walked into my house every day. For months, smiling in my face, holding my baby while texting my husband under the table, I found the messages. I saw how she flirted, how she schemed, how she fantasized about replacing me. And yet, here were my parents, calling me too harsh, too unforgiving, too emotional. My mother actually said, maybe you weren't meeting his needs. Maybe that's why he looked elsewhere. I dropped the phone, literally dropped it. The sound of it hitting the tile echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just gaslighting. It was betrayal in its purest form. He betrayed me. She betrayed me. And now, the people who raised me were betraying me too. My father said I needed to be bigger than this. That forgiveness was what real women chose. I nearly laughed. Real women? Real women don't bury their pain to make everyone else feel better. Real women don't smile while their lives are being dismantled. Real women don't stay silent when their soul is being shattered. My silence was my answer, and yet, they didn't hear me. Or maybe they just didn't want to. They even tried to remind me of childhood memories. Remember when Julie shared her toys with you? My God. As if a sandbox kindness at age 5 justified stealing my husband 20 years later. Stories of betrayal don't start with monsters. They start with the people we loved most, the ones we trusted. That's what makes them hurt so much. It's not just the act, it's the person who commits it. I told them I wasn't going to back down, that I wouldn't pretend this was just a misunderstanding. Julie lied, Julie seduced, Julie destroyed, and they wanted me to pretend it was an accident. I reminded them she stood in my living room and told me to leave my own house, that she cried in silence after I kicked her out, not before she ruined my life. But nothing I said seemed to land. It was like I was speaking a language they no longer understood. They said nobody believed her when she first came to them crying, but they do now, because she's pregnant. Or at least, that's what they thought. I started to suspect otherwise. There were no doctor visits, no morning sickness, just dramatic declarations and a weaponized belly. But at the time, I kept those doubts to myself. I wasn't ready to face that truth yet, and I sure wasn't ready to expose her without proof. So I distanced myself, emotionally, spiritually. I started seeing my parents less, talking to them even less than that. Every conversation felt like a trial where I was both defendant and executioner. And I was tired of explaining pain to people who refused to feel it. Tired of proving betrayal to people who chose blindness. Tired of loving people who didn't know how to love me back. But the story wasn't done unraveling. No, the truth was about to surface in a way none of us expected. And when it did, the house of lies Julie built would come crashing down, piece by piece. I used to think family would be the first to stand by you when your world falls apart. But when betrayal knocks you off your feet, sometimes the ones closest to you are the ones tightening the noose. My parents didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask if I was eating, sleeping, breathing. Instead, they asked how Julie was. They begged me to forgive her, to put myself in her shoes. But guess what? I had no more room left for guilt trips in my own house. They told me she cried in silence, like that somehow made her betrayal more noble, that I should be the bigger person because she was pregnant and vulnerable. I couldn't believe. I was being painted as the villain for kicking out the woman who stole my husband. I was deceived, manipulated, and abandoned, all while they tried to make me feel like the problem. It was gaslighting in its most dangerous form, dressed as family concern. But I saw through it. There's this particular kind of pain that hits when your reality is questioned. When your parents suggest maybe you misinterpreted what happened. Maybe Julie didn't mean to betray you. Maybe your husband was the only one to blame. I sat there, stunned, while my mother said, "She made a mistake, sweetheart. Don't throw away your sister over a man." A mistake? That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan. She planned it all. And I was done excusing it. It hurt more than I can put into words. Because I wasn't just fighting betrayal anymore. I was fighting for the right to call betrayal what it is. They wanted to rewrite the story, turn Julie into a misguided girl, erase the fact that I found the messages, that he broke me first, that she finally left me with nothing but silence and pain. I didn't need anyone to believe me anymore. My silence was my answer, so I did something I never imagined doing. I told them I wouldn't tolerate it. I said, if you think her tears excuse what she did, then maybe you don't know what love looks like either. They went quiet. For the first time, they stopped pushing. And in that stillness, I felt the most powerful I had in months. I stood firm, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I finally realized he thought I would stay, and so did they. I wasn't going to be gaslit into compassion, not again. Compassion had nearly cost me my sanity. Forgiveness without accountability isn't grace, it's self-betrayal, and I'd done that for too long. So I showed them the proof, the messages, the hotel receipts, the lies, every little thread of truth they wanted to ignore. And when they saw it all laid out in front of them, they didn't say a word, not one. It was a weird kind of justice, watching them absorb the full weight of the truth they'd tried so hard to bury. The look on my dad's face, he couldn't deny it anymore. He knew, he finally knew. The truth came out, and no one could stuff it back into a neat little story. I wasn't the villain. I was the only one who hadn't lied. But even then, they didn't apologize. Not really. They just shifted to silence. That same silence that once belonged to me. I walked away from that conversation knowing something had shifted forever. The emotional strings they used to pull me, I cut them. With every word I spoke, I reclaimed a piece of myself. And I could tell, it scared them. Because when a woman stops begging to be understood and starts owning her truth, people get uncomfortable. But I wasn't here to make them comfortable. I was here to heal. And healing sometimes means closing doors for good. They begged her to come back home, to talk things out, to make peace. But I didn't care anymore. He betrayed me. She betrayed me. They defended the betrayal. What else was there to say? I had learned the most painful, beautiful truth. Family isn't always made of the people who raised you. Sometimes it's the version of yourself you build when you're forced to stand alone. And that woman, she was strong as hell. And as I shut off my phone, ignoring the 20 missed calls and one last message from my mom, "You'll regret cutting us out," I smiled. I didn't regret it. Not for 1 second. Because the version of me they raised would have stayed, would have forgiven, would have folded under pressure. But the version who walked out that day, she was fire. And what they didn't know yet was that the flames had just begun to rise. In those first few days after everything fell apart, I barely had time to breathe. The shock of what Julie did to me, and what my husband had been a part of, hit me like a ton of bricks. You'd think that the pain would paralyze me, that I'd stay in bed, crying and questioning my worth. But here's the thing. Betrayal has a funny way of either breaking you down completely or building you back up stronger than ever. And I wasn't about to let this destroy me. No way. I remembered something my grandmother once said. You don't have to stay down after you've been knocked. It's your choice to get back up. So, I did. First thing I did was cut through the chaos with a clear head. I knew I couldn't let my emotions dictate my next steps, no matter how much I wanted to scream and throw things at both of them. I was better than that. The anger could come later, but for now, I needed to make sure I was standing on solid ground. When the shock wore off, I got to work. I wasn't just a broken woman now. I was a force. My lawyer, someone I knew from years ago, called me in for a consultation. His first words were, "We'll make sure this isn't going to end well for them." And that was all I needed to hear. I knew I had to act fast. I wasn't going to be one of those women who let her pain take the wheel. No, this was my moment to regain control, to fight back. I started gathering evidence right away. Photos, documents, emails, and texts. I found the messages he sent her while I was at work, while I was planning family holidays. I knew he thought I wouldn't find them, but I'm smarter than he gave me credit for. That's what betrayal does, though. It makes you see things more clearly. It opens your eyes to who people really are. It hurts like hell, but it also lights a fire in you. You know, they say silence is a powerful weapon. At first, I didn't know if I should speak up or stay quiet, but my silence was my answer. I didn't need to scream to make them understand how hurt I was. I didn't need to get into a shouting match with Julie or even my husband. Instead, I quietly walked away from their lies, from their manipulation. I was no longer their emotional punching bag. I had control now, and I wasn't about to let them take that from me. It wasn't just the legal stuff I was dealing with. Emotionally, I had to be strong too. I kept reminding myself that revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about reclaiming what was mine. It was about taking back my dignity and my peace. I wasn't fighting for their approval or their sympathy. I was fighting for myself. It was hard at times, but I knew the only way through this was forward. And that's exactly what I did. My lawyer handled the divorce paperwork like a pro. It was efficient, swift, and thorough. I had every document, every proof of betrayal neatly laid out. My heart ached at the thought of what I was about to do, but in the end, I knew it was the only way. They were going to feel the consequences of their actions, and I would be the one to make sure they did. It wasn't about being petty. It was about holding them accountable for tearing my life apart, I didn't look back once I made that decision. No one, not even my parents, could change my mind now. They didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing, but I didn't care. They didn't have to. I had to live with myself, and I could sleep at night knowing that I was doing the right thing. I was standing up for my future, and that was all that mattered. When I told them about my plans, there was no hesitation in my voice. I knew what I had to do. As I sat at my desk, staring at all the legal papers in front of me, I realized something. I wasn't just getting rid of the toxic people in my life. I was cleansing myself. I was healing by taking control. I could already feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. My strength wasn't in my tears anymore. It was in my resolve. This was no longer about revenge. It was about survival, about coming out of this stronger than ever before. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The truth was about to come out, and I was ready to expose them for what they were. And when the time came, I would have everything I needed to make sure they didn't get away with it. This was my moment of clarity. My silence had been my answer, but now my actions would speak louder than anything. As I moved forward, I couldn't help but wonder, how could they possibly think they would get away with this? They had no idea what was coming. I was in control now, and nothing would stand in my way. The moment I found out the truth, it felt like the world had been pulled from under me. The whole situation, everything I had believed, everything I had been led to think, came crashing down in one brutal, explosive moment. I couldn't even wrap my head around it at first. Julie wasn't pregnant. All the manipulation, the betrayal, the endless drama had all been based on a lie, a calculated lie to destroy me, and I had almost fallen for it. I'll never forget the phone call. It was my husband. Yes, the same man who had broken me in ways I never thought possible, calling to confess. He told me that Julie had faked her pregnancy from the start. She'd told him stories of morning sickness, swollen feet, and all the other classic signs, but none of it was true. He had believed her. He had even told me he was leaving because they were expecting a child together, but it was all part of her plan. She planned it all. It was sickening. When he told me Julie wasn't even pregnant, I couldn't believe it. I was numb. I had been so sure that the pregnancy was real, that I'd been the one deceived, but now, everything I thought, I knew was shattered. I asked him how he could have let himself be manipulated like that. How could he have fallen for her lies? He didn't have an answer, and in that moment I realized it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered except that this was the final straw. It wasn't just about the pregnancy. It wasn't even just about the betrayal. What hit me hardest was the fact that they both thought I would stay. They thought I would forgive them, that I would accept their lies, their deception, without ever questioning them. Well, they were wrong. I wasn't some naive woman who would sit back and let them destroy me. I had found the messages. I had seen the proof, and that was all I needed to know. I wasn't going to be anyone's fool anymore. The pain of it all was suffocating. My mind raced back to all the times I had supported Julie, believing she was my sister, that I had done everything for her. I remembered how she cried in silence when she thought I couldn't hear her, asking me for help with her struggles, how I opened my heart and home to her. I remembered everything she'd said, about how much she appreciated me, and now I had to face the brutal truth that I was nothing to her, just another pawn in her game. I was furious at her, furious at him, but most of all, I was angry with myself for not seeing the signs sooner. But then again, maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe that's how they planned it. Keep me in the dark long enough until I would no longer be able to escape. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't afraid to face the truth, even if it hurt, even if it shattered my heart. The truth was the only thing that would set me free. And in that moment, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to let them drag me down with their lies. I was going to expose them for who they truly were. The truth came out, and it would be my weapon now. I wouldn't let them get away with it. I wouldn't let them continue thinking they could manipulate me. I had to show them that I was stronger than their betrayal. I could feel the tension in my chest as I held on to that truth. It was like a spark in the dark, igniting a fire that I knew would burn everything in its path. The thought of exposing Julie, of showing everyone exactly what she had done, how she'd used her pregnancy as a tool to destroy my life, it was exhilarating. But it wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, my dignity. There was a strange sense of clarity that came with the truth. I realized that all the pain, all the hurt, all the rage I had felt, it was justified. What they did was unforgivable, but it wasn't my job to carry the weight of their actions. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The truth would do that for me. All I had to do was step aside and let it unfold. But as much as the truth was a relief, it was also a wake-up call. It was a reminder that trust, once broken, can never be repaired. Julie had exposed herself, and she had exposed him as well. Neither of them were worthy of my forgiveness, my love, or my time. The truth had set me free, but it had also made one thing crystal clear. They were no longer a part of my life. This wasn't the end of my journey, though. The pain was still there, buried beneath the surface, but I knew the hardest part was over. The hardest part was facing the truth, and I had done that. I had confronted the lies, and now I was ready for what came next. The pieces of my life were scattered, but now they were mine to pick up. And when I was ready, I would rebuild it. Stronger, wiser, and with no room for people like them in it. I never thought I'd reach a point where I would be so over everything that I wouldn't even care about what my parents had to say anymore. But here we were. After everything Julie had done to me, after all the hurt she caused, I thought my parents would at least stand by me. But no. Instead, they chose to shame me. They called me the cruel one, the one who had thrown her pregnant sister out onto the street. They didn't care about the betrayal. They didn't care about the lies. All they cared about was Julie's story. When they called me, I could hear the anger in their voices. They scolded me like I was the one who had done something wrong. "How could you do that to your sister?" they asked, as if my actions weren't a direct result of Julie's betrayal. "She's pregnant. You can't do this to her." It was like they had completely erased everything that had led up to that moment, as if the months of lies and deception never happened. I was stunned. How could they prioritize her? How could they not see that what Julie had done was unforgivable? She had betrayed me, and they were treating her like the victim. It wasn't just the phone call. It was everything. They never once asked how I was feeling. They never once acknowledged the hurt I had been through. They never once said, "Are you okay?" No. Instead, they expected me to drop everything and fix their mistake. They expected me to just forgive Julie because she was pregnant, as if that would suddenly erase the devastation she had caused. But it didn't. Not for me, anyway. It was infuriating. They couldn't even understand the depth of what had happened. They didn't see the pain of being betrayed by the one person who was supposed to have my back. They didn't see how it felt to have your own sister tear apart your life. I tried to explain to them, tried to make them understand how deeply Julie had hurt me, but it was like talking to a wall. Their minds were made up, and no matter what I said, no matter how much I begged them to see the truth, they just couldn't. It was heartbreaking, really. These were the people who had raised me, who I thought would always be on my side. But in that moment, it felt like they had chosen her over me. They believed her lies. They believed she was the victim in all of this, not the woman whose husband had slept with her, not the woman who had been blindsided by her own sister. They didn't want to see the truth, and in some ways, that hurt more than anything Julie had done. But what really stung was the apology that came later. After they found out about the fake pregnancy, after they realized Julie had been playing them all along, they called me again. This time, it was different. They were no longer angry. They were regretful. They told me they were sorry for not standing by me, for not seeing the truth sooner. But I couldn't hear it. The damage had already been done. I had been left to deal with everything on my own, while they stood by, pretending like nothing had happened. The truth was, their apology was meaningless. It came too late. They had chosen to believe Julie over me in the most crucial moment, and no amount of words could fix that. I didn't need their apology. What I needed was their support when it mattered, and that was something they could never give me back. The worst part was knowing that they thought they could just fix everything with a few words. They assumed that because they were family, I should automatically forgive them. They didn't understand that trust had been shattered. That betrayal wasn't something you could undo with an apology. It wasn't something you could just brush off because you were family. I had to protect myself, and sometimes that meant walking away from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I didn't want to carry the weight of their disappointment anymore. I didn't want to feel guilty for choosing myself, for choosing my peace over their misguided loyalty to Julie. The truth had already come out, and there was no going back. Julie had lost her family's support, and my parents had lost my trust. The damage was irreversible. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I wasn't going to keep living in the shadow of their mistakes, so I did the only thing I could do. I moved on. I let go of the resentment, the anger, and the guilt. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. And in that future, there was no room for people who couldn't stand by me when I needed them the most. Julie was gone from my life, and now it was time to make space for something better. I never thought it would come to this, but here I was, standing at the crossroads of my life, with everything I thought I knew about family crumbling before my eyes. Julie, my sister, had not only betrayed me, but she had also dragged me into a toxic web of lies, manipulation, and deceit. And as much as I had wanted to believe that family could be my safe haven, It was clear now that it was the very source of my pain. There was no room for reconciliation, no room for forgiveness anymore. It was time to let go. At that point, I knew there was no going back. Julie had crossed a line I couldn't even imagine crossing. She had stolen from me my trust, my peace, and my happiness. But it wasn't just her. It was everyone who had stood by her. My parents, who I had once thought would stand by me no matter what, had sided with her in my darkest moment. They had chosen her, the woman who had betrayed me, over their own daughter. It was as if nothing I had done in my life had ever mattered to them. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it was one I had to force down. I had no choice but to let go of the ties that had bound me to them, and so I did. I made the cleanest break I could. I cut ties with Julie, with my parents, and with anyone who had been part of that toxic triangle. There was no anger in my heart anymore, only a quiet, resolute sense of peace. I couldn't keep living in a world where my family was a source of pain and betrayal. I deserved more than that. I deserved to be surrounded by people who valued me, who respected me, and who would never pull me into a situation like this again. The hardest part, I think, was not the actual act of cutting ties. It was the realization that I had to walk away from the very people who should have been my support system. My parents had raised me, and for so long, I had clung to the belief that no matter what happened, they would always be there for me. But they weren't. They had failed me, and now I had to learn how to stand on my own, to trust myself more than I ever had before. I couldn't deny the feelings of abandonment and hurt, though. It would have been so much easier to keep pretending that everything was okay, to let my parents and my sister back into my life. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the solution. I couldn't continue living in the shadow of their mistakes, and if that meant walking away from them forever, then so be it. My peace was more important than any false sense of family loyalty. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my sense of self. And the betrayal had shattered so many things, but it had also opened my eyes to a truth I couldn't ignore. I had been living in a toxic environment for far too long, and now I had the power to change that. I was finally free to create the life I deserved, a life where I was in control, where I didn't have to beg for respect or love from people who didn't know how to give it. Of course, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice, but I had made my peace with that. I had to believe that letting go of the past would allow me to build a future that was mine to own, one where I wasn't defined by the mistakes of others. The hardest part of all of this was not the act of leaving, but learning to be okay with it. It's one thing to walk away, but it's another to truly accept that you made the right decision. I had to remind myself every day that I was doing what was best for me. I was breaking free from a toxic cycle that had been holding me back for too long. And while the process of healing would take time, I knew that with each passing day, I was growing stronger. By cutting off those ties, I had created space for the people who truly mattered, those who saw me for who I really was and loved me without conditions. I wasn't alone. I wasn't lost. I was finally free to live my life on my terms, without the weight of betrayal weighing me down. It wasn't just about leaving Julie behind. It was about leaving behind the version of myself that had let all of this happen. It was about stepping into the woman I was always meant to be. And as I closed the door on my past, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The chains that had bound me were finally broken. I was no longer a prisoner of my past mistakes, or the mistakes of those who had wronged me. I was free.